Welcome to Talkin SEC. Writer, photographer, and producer Phillip Jordan discusses the latest news and breaks down the biggest games with the best analysts around. Now, from Southeast Alabama, a state that knows its sports, here is Phillip Jordan.
What's up, y'all? It's the beginning of a new week, and welcome into Talking SEC. I'm your host, Phillip Jordan, from Last Word on College Football and 96.9 The Legend in Dothan, Alabama, where I am the in-studio host and producer for Dothan Wolves Football. Hope everybody had a great weekend. It was an interesting week in the Southeastern Conference. In just a few moments, I am going to be joined by Coach Max Howell, and we're going to talk about all the stuff happening in the SEC this weekend, talk about Shane Beamer becoming the new head coach for the South Carolina Gamecocks, and much, much more in college football. Before I bring Coach on, I'll let you guys know you can find me and the podcast. You can find me on social media at PJordanSEC. You can find the podcast on Twitter at Talking SEC Pod. Of course, the podcast is on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and all your favorite podcast platforms. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please subscribe, rate, and review. Leave a review. I will read it on a future edition of the show. And you can always email me at sportstalkphilipjordan@gmail.com. Now, let's get Coach Max Howell on the phone. Everybody joining me today on Talking SEC is Coach Max Howell, a longtime assistant coach in the SEC and a longtime Sports Talk radio host in the Southeast as well. And Coach Howell, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show, and I hope you're doing well, and I appreciate you coming on again.
Well, thank you. I'm glad Thanksgiving's over because I ate too much as usual, and then I'm getting ready. I'm trying to take a break on the food bit. We're watching a lot of good football. And the thing I got to say, Phil, at least the SEC's getting their games in. Mm-hmm. You know, we don't have the situation like we do in the Big Ten. And, of course, the Big 12 stumbled in the Pac-12. Who knows what they're doing out there. So, I think we got good ball games this past weekend in particular. We're finding out now just wanted to, delayed or canceled now. I guess don't miss Texas A&M. But at least most of the games are getting played, and I know the fan base are really appreciating that.
Yeah, they're not having to cancel some games to make sure two teams get into their conference championship games. That's a good sign for the conference.
Right. Yep. Well, it's going to be interesting. I think the whole question of the playoff situation now is going to be about Ohio State because they've got 5. What are they going to do now with because they played with, I think they had 15 out this past weekend against Michigan State. They did win the ball game. But what are they doing with this Michigan situation? Because I'm not real sure Harbaugh's going to stay at Michigan. And if he's not, he could just say, hey, it's over, I'm leaving. And if they don't play but 5, do they put them, they're undefeated, do they put them in the conference championship? And then what do they do about the playoffs? Because I think the committee said 6 games minimum that they had to play.
Yeah, I remember that. And that is interesting because then, well, they don't get to play. Are you going to change your rules last minute just to make sure Ohio State gets in? Which, I mean, they are the best team in that conference. I know that. But it's going to be interesting, I think, as we go down the stretch, especially if Texas A&M sits there with just one loss. Then if you start comparing resumes between them and Ohio State, I mean, that's going to be an interesting situation, I think. If, for instance, Alabama beats Florida in the SEC championship game, and then you got Clemson, Notre Dame get in, that 4 spot, if it comes down to that, I think that's going to be quite interesting. It's going to be an interesting decision by the committee. Yeah,
it is. And I see you hit it right on the head right there when you said committee. Most people think NCAA's got a lot. This thing is an ad hoc committee that makes a decision. And too, one of the underlying points I think that they favor is what about the crowd draw? What about the TV audience? And if there's any way, as opposed to putting 2 teams from one conference in, if they can get Ohio State in as a 4th team, they're going to try to do it any way they can, I think.
There was one year, Ohio State had the 1 loss, but they did not win their conference. And then Penn State won the conference, but they had 2 losses. I believe this was when I was still over at, when we still had the ESPN station here in Dothan. I felt like that was an instance what you're talking about there. I mean, Penn State's a brand name too, I know, but Ohio State's different. And I think that had a lot to do with why they got in barely at the end.
Yep, I don't disagree with that at all, and that's what I'm saying. Of course, 2020 is going to go down with an asterisk by it because there's so many different, scenarios that have broken loose. Notre Dame plays in the ACC. Then what do we do? Do they take two teams from one? What if Florida beats Alabama? Do they take Florida and Alabama out of the SEC in the top four teams? I mean, legitimately, probably they could, but then what does that do to Ohio State with if they don't play but 5? Do they get pushed out? I mean, it's going to be really. They got some really major decisions to make over the next 30 days.
Yeah, that could be the worst case scenario for Ohio State. Is just say, for instance, Florida was to barely beat Alabama in a close game, where you're going to put both of those teams in, and then Clemson beats Notre Dame in a really close game. You got to think those two get in, then Ohio State's going to be sitting there. Even if they do win the Big Ten championship game, I mean, if you put those 4 teams up against Ohio State, their resume, I mean, you got to pick them 4. And the thing about it, I look at it like this too: it's not Ohio State's fault. I blame their conference.
No, it's not. Yeah, that's true. They came. Look, they played without 15 kids this past weekend just to be able to play, and they did, and they won. And you're absolutely right. So what we're saying, get an ACC, SEC to play the game in Atlanta. That's a midway point in the conference as far as the conferences are concerned, and then they put an asterisk by it. Whoever wins that one, that would end up probably being Alabama will end up probably playing Notre Dame for the championship, because I don't think they'll match them up with Clemson to start with. So that's going to be interesting to see how all that unfolds over the next 30 days.
Yeah, it will be. I do not envy to be anybody on that committee.
Well, they can't win. You know what I mean? They're going to. Would you not think though this would have been a perfect year to go 8 teams? If they'd have gone to 8 teams, they'd have solved most of their problems this year. Then if they want to drop it back next year, the regular condition to 4, that's okay. But they've done everything else that was, really out of the norm to get to where they are. So why not just invite 8? What about Coastal Carolina? I'm not. And what about Cincinnati? Coach Marshall gets beat this past weekend, so that takes him out of the picture. But there's 2 more teams that probably could qualify, if you just based on one loss record.
Yeah, I mean, Cincinnati, what they've done, the American, I mean, you got to say, I mean, which you might could argue they're better than the Pac-12, but the American Conference is the best of the group of 5s. And then I'll watch that BYU Coastal Carolina game. You can't tell me Coastal Carolina's not a legit team. The way they physically dominated that game on the line of scrimmage against BYU, and BYU's got some really good athletes. I mean, they are really good over at BYU, and BYU did not win that game at line of scrimmage. Zach Wilson, their quarterback, had not seen that kind of pressure all year long, and they constantly got to him, and then they dominated on offense. They could not stop that triple option attack that Coastal Carolina's got. So those 2 teams there belong. And then I think, I guess just this misthinking, if you had it at 8 teams, then people say, okay, put Ohio State in. I don't think it would be that big of a deal, but when it's 4, I think you're going to see a lot of people, and social media is going to blow up, I believe, if Ohio State win or if they get into the playoff when they do announce that in a few weeks. Yeah,
I agree. Now, where Coastal Carolina's playing this weekend.
Oh, I know they're going to play the Troy Trojans, and I hope
exactly right. So you better get you a press pass to that one now.
I'm just going to, if he listens, I hope my good friend Barry McKnight, I hope Troy does do well.
Yeah, I do too.
With that one,
I'm really surprised they won 29-0 at South Alabama. Of course, they were supposed to open the season with them, and I thought they had a good chance in. But South Alabama kind of been up and down, most of part of the year. And I really didn't know how Troy was going to play. They just got blown out the week before by Appalachian State, so I didn't know how they were going to play. But they went down and won convincingly, I think.
Yeah, with Troy, it's interesting with them because, they play Coastal Carolina. So, I mean, most people say that Coastal Carolina should win that game the way Troy's played this year. I mean, hopefully Troy can play a good game and make the upset. I hope they do that. But more likely Coastal Carolina should win that game. But then you got Louisiana Monroe the next week. They're not good this year, so that's 6 wins. I mean, I know it's not maybe what people are used to with Neil Brown, but for Chip Lindsey, you won 5 last year, then you win 6 this year in a difficult year with the pandemic, everything. I mean, that would be a good sign, I think, for Troy moving forward if they could get bowl eligible and maybe get to a bowl game.
Yep, I agree. I think so, and I think they'll get one. But I think there's enough of the smaller bowl games that they've already removed the 1-loss record where they had to have a minimum. I think, and they can kind of pick and choose. Jody Williams, I think, runs a couple out of Montgomery. He's got one up on the East Coast as well. And I've already seen some potential matchups, and Troy's involved in that, particularly if they could get a win over Louisiana Monroe at the end.
Yes, I mean, I always hope for that for Troy. Now, something I wanted to lead off to, another thing, South Carolina naming their coach. And, it's kind of weird. You think about these coaching searches, and I actually just blanked. It's the season extending as long as they have. You're getting close to the first signing period, too. So,
yep.
They hire Shane Beamer. Now, of course, Shane Beamer, we know who he is. His dad,
sure.
Coach at Virginia Tech, Frank Beamer. He coached under Spurrier at South Carolina. He's been coaching under Lincoln Riley there at Oklahoma. Just overall, what are your thoughts on this hire for South Carolina?
The first person he needs to call is his dad, because here's the thing he hasn't seen, Phillip. He's not seen the defense that the SEC puts up. Remember, he's coached in the ACC, and basically he's coached in Oklahoma with Lincoln Riley, and he's always been on the offensive side of the ball. So I think the thing I think is going to get him, he'll struggle for a while. First of all, I'll be interested to see the amount of money that they can afford to spend on assistant coaches to bring a good group in. The recruiting base is, because of Clemson, the recruiting base has shrunk through the years, and then they had to pay $11.5 million out to Will, in the last change. They had to make that. They had to make a huge payoff. I think the payout was $13 million. They got it for $11.5. So what does that do to their budget? Muschamp, I think held out, and I think he did as good as he could do that. Tell you the truth. Now, all that being said, that's a fresh new face. He make it come in with a lot of enthusiasm. But just remember, the only two coaches that's ever really had any significance at South Carolina was Lou Holtz at the end of his career, Steve Spurrier at the end of his career. So they just couldn't afford to go after somebody like that, in my opinion.
And with them, I mean, that obviously, the Steve Spurrier era, especially that run they had in the early 2000s where they had the 3 straight years of 11 wins or more. I mean, do you think that's obtainable again for that program?
I think the league has gotten too tough. Mullen now is at Florida, and I think they're going to have a change at Tennessee too. I didn't think so until this past weekend, but that certainly looks like that's brewing as well. So, the league is a little bit tougher. Kirby's going to be 10-2 regardless, and South Carolina's going to be one of those 10 every year. So, where does South Carolina fit? Kentucky's been up. Those dudes have done a good job there. By the way, he fired his offensive coordinator and his quarterback coach already. So they replaced Eddie Green's gone. He's been a face in the Southeastern Conference at the offensive side of the ball a while. So Kentucky's moved himself up. Where does South Carolina fit? I think it's going to be an uphill battle for him. I really do.
Talking about uphill battle, that's a good transition to the next thing, because we mentioned a little bit, but Alabama defeating LSU on Saturday night. I told you off air when it got 35-14. I said, "All right, that's enough. I've seen enough of this game. I know where this one's headed." Another dominant performance by Alabama, and it's just on their way to clinch the SEC West. Of course, we know they're going to play Florida on the 19th. I don't like to wish games to hurry up and go, but I'm actually looking forward to those two playing each other. But overall, Alabama, and now Devontae Smith, I mean, he's been great all year, but I think that game really caught the nation's attention, and now it seems like people want to get him in the Heisman race as well. Just when you look at that discussion and just Alabama overall, just what are your overall thoughts?
Well, I'm going to tell you, and I agree with you on his ability to play. Remember, he was a number 3. In my opinion, he'd be number 2 if Waddle was still there. Mm-hmm. That's Alabama just loaded that position. If he was to jump in the race for whatever, that's going to water down, and Mac Jones won't win it. It'll go to Clemson, to their quarterback. So I hate to say that, but it's just a matter of fact. It just looks like to me that Alabama is so balanced in talent, and then go back and look at I don't ever remember a wide receiver winning the Heisman, to tell you the truth. I'm trying to go back in my mind recently when I heard some of this talk after this past weekend. So I say all that to you that, and I know he made one heck of a catch. I was on the show earlier today. He made one heck of a catch. I think it was his third touchdown when he leaped over in the back corner of the end zone. But I'm going to tell you who the hero of that day was, the guy that threw it, because he had to throw over 3 people to get that ball without being touched, and he did. And of course, Smith went up and got it, and that was his ability alone. So I think you look at all of those things. Alabama, when you measure, if anybody watched the week before with LSU and Texas A&M, you could have certainly been able to tell at that time that the talent level between Alabama and LSU is wide gaps right now. But it is with almost they're going to be favored. Phillip, they're going to be favored with whoever they play in the playoffs. I'm going to tell you. When Alabama's clicking, there's nobody in the country can play with them. That means Clemson, Notre Dame, Ohio State. None of them can. Because their defense has gotten a lot better, and their offense is just almost unstoppable now.
Yeah, it is. And, just kind of looking at LSU for a second, just when you look at this program, you would have to expect there's going to be a change of defense coordinator. I mean, that's just got to be a given when the season's over with. When you look at this program going into next year and moving forward at Orgeron, where do you see this program headed?
Well, let me tell you first. Let's address the defensive coordinator situation. Bo Pelini's got a 3-year contract. Mm-hmm. That's first and foremost, at about $1.5 million each. That's okay. But here's the deal: they hired him after they had fired him 5 years ago when he went to Nebraska. They basically fired him for the same thing. I think he does not grasp defenses. I was fortunate enough to be involved with some of the best in the country when I was at Florida State. I know how we covered with Leroy Butler, Deion Sanders, and that bunch. I know how we can cover anybody's wide receivers. But when Alabama has not changed one thing about their scheme. They put 2 wides on each side and they cross them when the ball snap. And the two defensive backs always take the wrong man. They always take the inside guy. And that's what happened. I think after a while, if you had enough tapes, you could prevent that. And I just don't think Bo Pelini can conceive that. That's just an opinion. So I start with that. I thought he probably would have fired him on the sideline Saturday night, but he didn't. He let him go. He took all his emotion out on everybody else. So where do they go? They don't have right now. The Finley kid's going to be okay, but he's still a freshman. I think they'll have some kids jump out of the portal and they'll transfer out. The Johnson kid's going to go. I think his dad was with us at Florida State when I was there. That kid's a talented kid. He's a 6'5" guy that can run and throw, but he's got to be developed. He's not being developed there right now. So I think you're gonna have some kids go. I don't see LSU next year being much better than they are this year, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting. At Orgeron, you got to prove that you're not a one-hit wonder with what happened last year.
That's true.
And I hate to make the comparison, but it's kind of got that feeling of Gene Chizik a little bit.
Yep. Well, I think after winning to Tuscaloosa, and I think that was a bunch of fault. That was just false ego for him. He goes into Tuscaloosa and wins that ball game. It wins it convincingly, but they beat everybody else convincingly too. They had an unusual year. 14 kids off that squad went to the NFL. Aranda might have been one of the best defensive minds in the country. He leaves and goes to Baylor. The biggest loss to me was Joe Brady, was the quarterback coach. I know Burris stepped up and did what he had to do to make it happen, but the defense certainly has taken a step back, to say the least, and it had not taken a step forward till Brady got there. So you got to give some credit. He went from there making about $400,000 or $500,000 to making $3 million with the Carolina Panthers as offensive coordinator out of 1 year. You don't get that. You don't get that transition very often. So I say that to you that I think they got an uphill battle. The talent level will still come, but it's not going to be, I think, what they would like to have. But I think they're going to have to make some changes. You made that comment earlier. They're going to have to make some changes on the sideline.
So earlier on Saturday, of course, Florida beat Tennessee 31-19, but that game wasn't even as close as that. They got a couple scores there at the end to Tennessee.
Yep.
I mean, Trask, another fantastic game for him. I'm just saying this. It's like I feel like watching Florida. Dan Mullen's like, the heck with the run game. We're just going to fling it all over the place, and I think that's
right.
okay right now. But when you play Alabama on the 19th, you're going to have to be a little bit more than that. If not, they're going to eat you alive, I would think.
Yeah, well, their offensive line's not good enough, though. That's why he's having to do that. They got Tony back there. They can move him the tailback or put him up as a slot because they got really two outstanding wide receivers. Tony's one of them, but of course Pitts is the other one. I won't be interested to see what they do with Pitts because Alabama's going to double him. I think I really do believe that. If they play him on a line of scrimmage, they're going to put a linebacker on his nose. They're going to walk up a strong safety. If they back him off, they're going to put a linebacker in the gap, probably put a corner over there. So I'm going to be really interested, Phillip, to see how they cover him because he's the best tight end in the country. He might be one of the best I've ever seen to be 6'6", 250 and run like he can and catch the ball. He's got body control that's just unbelievable for a guy that size. And of course, then you got Trask sitting back there that can find him, and he just throws it over. The guy goes up on jump ball and he comes down 95% of the time with it.
Yeah, it's amazing with him, and he's really he's just a receiver in a tight end's body. I mean, the way he can move.
That's very true. Very true.
I mean, with that though, with them, I mean, defensively they have had issues this year too as well, and that's kind of where I worry. I mean, Florida's best option, you would think they're going to get it in a shootout with Alabama. That's anybody's option against Alabama. You're just going to hope it's a shootout. But with them, I mean, looking ahead to the 19th, what is your opinion on the best route for Florida to pull off that upset?
Florida has to play I don't believe Alabama can get beat. Alabama have to give it to them. In other words, they'll have to drop the ball. They'll have to fumble the football. They'll have to bobble a kick. The special teams won't play well. And now Alabama's got too many good athletes. I don't think Florida can beat them. I think Florida first half can maybe stay competitive, but they don't have enough depth. Alabama will be running those second, third guys. I just watched Coach Saban's press conference today. They running 10 to 11 defensive linemen in. Every 2 to 3 plays, they change it. Well, by the third quarter, your offensive bunch is wore out because they got fresh legs on the other side. And I'm watching that right now, that phase of it. But I don't believe they're going to try to run the ball very much. They'll use the extended where they flare and throw the ball to a back throw it to Tony out of the backfield. They'll do all kinds of stuff. They'll do screens. They'll try some bubble screens and all. But Alabama's defense has gotten better. They've gotten really, really. Coach Saban was addressing that today. They're playing as a unit now, and they just got so much talent. And they got to go. First of all, they want to go undefeated. And second is they want to win a national championship. And when you get that much talent with a coaching staff as good as Alabama is, and then you get that kind of talent on the field of play, they're going to be hard to beat. So I say that all to you to say, first of all, the over and under could be 90 on that ball game on the 19th. But I think Alabama will probably win it. But the line's going to probably be about 14, 18 points, I think. And I think Alabama wins it. I think they cover.
Now, the other team in the state of Alabama that we have not talked about, the Auburn Tigers. Which, of course, people listening to this know I write about them for Last World College Football. So it's always an interesting week with Auburn, something new almost every week. And and this is my opinion. I don't have inside information. I don't think they're going to make a change this year just because of the buyout. I think that's a big part. I mean, you would probably know better than I would. But it's not good right now with Gus Malzahn around the program. And then what he said after the game Saturday, then have to come back and say something different on Sunday to kind of walk back what he said about expectations at Auburn. It feels like it's not this year, but it feels like inevitable that in the next year or two, he's not going to be at Auburn coach anymore unless something major changes. Some major changes are made.
I agree. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I made the statement because of those flip-flopping back and forth on that. If I was in, you remember, I think let's go back. You remember how he got that contract? They had an interim president and an interim, Jay Jacobs had already gone to Florida. They had an interim athletic director and an interim president. And look, hats off to Jimmy Sexton. He used in there and put that $35-40 million contract down there, and they signed it just to keep everybody from jumping ship. Now they stuck with it, And so my point would be, if I was this goes beyond the athletic department. This got to go to the board of trustees. I'd call Gus in and said, okay, I'm going to do the old Southern thing. We don't have the money to pay you $21 million or $23 or whatever it is. We want to know how much you want down and how much a month. And then I'd go out there on the street and get my money. I'd raise it somewhere and try to make that change, because I'm like you, though. I've heard you say before, Phil, I just keep see them getting better. I just don't see them getting any better. They had to go with a whole new offensive front this year. What you tell me when you have to replace all 5 offensive linemen? Then you get a couple hurt. Then now you got to dip in down to your freshmen and stick those guys in the SEC, particularly in the West. That's not going to help you any. Everybody, when I can lay on my couch and watch them play and tell you, as soon as they make more than a 6 or 8 yard run, the next handoff is to the tailback up the middle. It's every time. Well, if you already know that, then, that's why they're not making very much. That's why they beat up Big Lynn, and why they can't they can't establish a consistent offense right now. So, I say all that to you to say I agree with you. I think he's going this year, but I don't know another year or two at 8-4. I'm just not going to make it happen, I don't think.
Yeah, and, when I watch them play, and I kind of keep it a little bit, I'm not a recruiting guru. I mean, that's probably one of the things I do slack at doing this, but I do know they have not recruited well at offensive line. That's been a big issue for them. And then I think Auburn's got good skill position players on offense. I mean, the receivers, they've got a solid group of receivers with Seth Williams, Eli Stove, and Anthony Schwartz. Running backs outside of Tank Bisbee. I think DJ Williams and Sean Showers are talented. And I think, and people get on Bo Nix every single week, I think he has the talent to be a good quarterback in college football. But it's not all on him, and I do think there's some coaching involved in here, because if people remember, we saw this with Jarrett Stidham. He regressed in his second year as a starting quarterback under Gus Malzahn.
Right.
Jeremy Johnson didn't get better. I mean, outside of Nick Marshall and Cam Newton at Auburn, Gus has not had success with quarterbacks, developing quarterbacks there at Auburn. I mean, that's a main issue with Bo Nix, because one thing he does a lot, he got better this year, I think, but running out of the pocket a lot. But I feel like, and look, I'm a guy I didn't, play, just a big fan of the sport. I would think that's something a coach would sit him down and say, you've got to stay in the pocket. You leaving the pocket is hurting us, but it just seems like it's the same thing with him week in, week out. And I just question, is he getting properly coached to be a better quarterback?
But it's two things that quick now. You got to really look. He runs out of the pocket because he has to, because his offensive line is not good enough. It breaks down. Here's the other thing: why he's becoming a better runner. If you ever noticed, when he comes out of the pocket after about the second ball game, he's not throwing a pass on the run. You know why? He can't. He's not that talented to do. He can't throw on the run. You look at Justin Fields. Justin Fields can throw it right-handed or left-handed, running full speed either side. Bo Nix can't do that. He's a different caliber kind of kid. So what do you do with it? You put him in a moving pocket, maybe. You roll him out some and let him throw, but you change your routes. You get more people involved. But see, they're afraid to do that, Phillip, because they got to give him a back or a tight end in the block because the offensive line is so poor. Mm-hmm. So they're really in a catch-22. But a lot of it, just you alluded to that, a lot of it has to do with bringing quality coaches in, for somebody can take what talent's there and then improve it, because they're not being coached up right now. None of them are.
Yeah, it's just every week, and you're right. I mean, they look the same offensively every week. They're a little bit better at home. I mean, they're usually a lot better at home, actually, than they are on the road. Without
the crowd, though, they aren't.
I think that is a underrated thing, with Jordan-Hare, how loud it is when they have a full house in there. True. It is one of the tougher places to play in college football. Last before I let you go, and we kind of talked about it a little bit, but A&M, Texas A&M, they saw them on Saturday. I mean, they did not look great offensively against LSU the week before. Then, I mean, Auburn had a lead going into the fourth quarter, but 17 unanswered points by A&M. And we talk about A&M potentially sneaking into playoffs. If this team got into the playoffs, I mean, do you think can they be competitive with the other three that they would have to go up against?
But look, think about it. And you saw him play twice. I mean, really back to back. What if they show up? I don't think that. I think. Let me say this. I think they do have the talent to be competitive, but can Jimbo get it out of them 2 or 3 weeks in a row? I'm already putting Jimbo Fisher in the same boat, the same bus I'm putting Gus Malzahn on. The fact is, think about this. The most consistent thing about both those teams is inconsistency. Mm-hmm. They play well 1 week, and then the next week, they can't find a way out of a huddle. So I'd say this team, as well as they played this past weekend, expect that again coming up in another game or in a playoff. I don't know what'll happen or not. I'll be honest with you. I just don't. But I'm going to go beyond this. And you may not have looked at these numbers. I'm going to throw this just as a reminder. The last time Texas A&M won a national championship, you know what year that was?
I am at a loss. I cannot remember.
Listen to this carefully. 1938.
Oof.
So it may not just be Jimbo. It may be the environment around that program. Because Texas has been up and down. And, of course, look, that the state of Texas will have 200 D1 prospects every year or more, kids that can play. In Texas, there's some rumor about Tom Herman right now in Texas. So if that's all going on, why can't they have jumped on out there and really recruited at the level of Alabama or Georgia? But they haven't done that. Now, they'll be in the top 5, 6, 7. But when's the last time you saw them at 1 or 2? I don't ever remember seeing them at 1 or 2.
Yeah, that's true. It feels like their program, sometimes they're looked at as equals almost the way they're propped up with Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Auburn, some of them, but then maybe they're not because, like I said, that history is not there behind them. It's just you're from the state of Texas.
Very true.
I mean, the Texas Longhorns really aren't as great as maybe the Texas people would think they've been historically as well, because they don't have a bunch of national championships in their name either. I know the team I can name, and I know this is an SEC show, so people applaud me when I say this. Michigan's the same way. I mean, Michigan's got a lot of wins.
I agree. Absolutely.
But the national titles aren't there.
But Michigan's got the history. Michigan had more wins than any other major program in the country. Michigan's got the history for it. I think theirs is political inside, just an observation. They're in a very liberal state up there. They're the ones who tried to lead the forces on not playing the season this year. There's a lot of things that were going on there, and I look for Harbaugh just to walk on sometime over the next couple of weeks. And because if you watch that team play, they aren't being coached at all. They're doing things that I've had high school teams learn how to do in the 9th grade, as opposed to what I see some of those kids doing at Michigan right now. So I absolutely agree with you. They're one of those programs that do that. But I won't make one other comment. If in fact they fire Tom Herman and they hire Urban Meyer, and that's who they're going after, Texas will be back up there. They'll be back at the top in a year or two.
Oh, without a doubt. If he gets back into coaching, wherever he goes, they'll be national title contenders in 2 years. I mean, with what he can do. I mean, I'm not the biggest Urban Meyer fan, because some of the stuff that you read about what went on in Florida and up there, what happened in his last year at Ohio State. But I give him his due. If he goes somewhere, they're going to win. I mean, that's a guarantee with him. And Lincoln Riley will probably be not happy if Urban Meyer showed up in the Big 12.
That's a fact. But I agree. I think that's happening. I'll throw one more. I know we're getting close to the end, but I'm going to throw one more coach in there that's name is buzzing everywhere. But I feel the same way. He's an outstanding coach on the field, but got way too much baggage, and that's Hugh Freeze.
Yeah.
I can't see him getting back in it. Not the SEC. Not anytime soon.
I've heard people mention on other shows I've listened to that he's under double secret probation with the SEC. So,
here's what I do know for a fact. You know how Coach Saban brings in, Butch Jones and Sarkisian when they've had problems in other places. Well, he tried to get Hugh Freeze to come before we went to Liberty. And Sankey said no, I don't want him back in the SEC. So, and they wasn't going to put him on the field. They was going to put him in one of those all-field jobs where they analyze, break the tapes down, and all that stuff. And Sankey put a stop to it.
Yeah, I had heard that. So it's going to be interesting what happens with him moving forward too, if he ends up somewhere else after Liberty. But we have jumped all over the place. Is there anything SEC or college football related that we have not touched on that you got on your mind?
Well, right now the biggest thing is getting to the playoffs. And I don't think there's any doubt it's going to be Alabama, Clemson, Notre Dame in some order, and then that fourth slot. I'll be really watching. It's interesting to see what they do with Ohio State if he does. But if they rule them out because of only 5 games, if Michigan walks on them and they don't play, so that means they keep playing the conference championship. So they'll have to really do some maneuvering to get that to happen. So let's just set that aside. Who goes to number 4 without taking 2 teams from one conference? The first option, if Alabama beats Florida, then Alabama goes unquestionable. But the question will be if Clemson beats Notre Dame, if both of them have 1 loss apiece and then to each other, how do they handle that?
Yeah, that part there, I think both could get in, but I would be intrigued where they would seed them. I'm with you, what you said earlier. I would probably don't think they, just a committee, like we said, it's also a TV show in a way. The playoffs are.
Yep.
If they want Alabama and Clemson to play, I feel like they would want them to match up in the national championship game. But that's intriguing to me. And look, I'm just going to say this, and I know A&M, they've had a fantastic year. Nothing to take away from them. I would rather see Cincinnati in there than Texas A&M because I
agree with you.
Because A&M is going to be the 4 seed in that scenario. Yep. Either way, we've seen them play Alabama. They don't belong on the field with Alabama. Cincinnati could get blown out by them too, but we haven't seen that. I would rather see Cincinnati get in there if Ohio State don't get in instead of Texas A&M because, like I said, I've already seen that game. I've already seen that story, that movie. I don't want to see it again.
30-something points. Yeah. Alabama beat them last time, as they have most everybody else.
Yeah.
But see, that I wrap my portion up on this by answering your question. Those are the things I'm looking for. That I watch. And my schedule on Saturday is I catch the first ball game at 11 o'clock in the morning on the SEC channel or whoever else is playing. And then I stay all the way through to I get the wrap up on the SEC final scoreboard at 11:30 on Saturday night. So I'm staying 11 to 12 hours in my den right there watching, clicking back and forth, trying to catch 2 or 3 games at one time.
That's me as well, and some weeks I do try to stay up with the Pac-12 games, but sometimes I don't make it all the way through those. But
the only reason I don't is because I know they don't have a chance to get to the playoffs right now. I am interested to see what they do at Texas, though. After that came out about Urban Meyer, so they scored 62 this past weekend. Maybe they're trying to ensure that they don't nobody makes a change out there this year. So, but it's really interesting. It's a great time of the year for me.
Yeah, most definitely. It is a great time. It's going to be fun toward the end of the year. And, Coach, I do appreciate you taking the time. Come on the show as always. It's always great to hear your great insight, and I hope we can do this again sometime down the road.
Phillip, just give me a call. It's my pleasure. Anytime you want to call.
Everybody, that's going to do it for this edition of Talking SEC. Once again, thanks to Coach Max Howell for coming on the show. It's always fun to talk to him, get his take, his expert opinion on all things SEC football. Got a few more shows coming up this week. There will not be a podcast on Thursday, but tomorrow on Tuesday, I am scheduled to be joined by Bill Bender, national college football writer for the Sporting News. On Wednesday, I'll be joined by Aaron Torres, who you can listen to on Fox Sports Radio on the weekends. And, of course, his podcast, the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. So he'll be joining me on Wednesday. Both with Bill Bender and Aaron will be talking about all the things going on in SEC and kind of look at playoff stuff. Of course, the interview with Aaron will be taped on Tuesday before the playoff rankings come out. So on Wednesday's pod, I will open up giving my thoughts on the latest college football rankings, which I really don't think there's going to be much change from where they are right now. Then on Friday, I'll be joined by Brandon Eisman, my colleague over at Last Word on College Football, where we will pick all the SEC games and probably some other big games in college football as well on Friday. So that's what you can expect the rest of the week here on Talking SEC. So, guys, I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Remember, you can follow me on social media at PJordanSEC. The podcast is on Twitter at Talking SEC Pod. You can listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please subscribe, rate, and review. If you leave a review, I will read it on a future edition of the show. I'll talk to you guys on Tuesday. Until then, bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Talkin' SEC. Follow Phillip on social media at PJordanSEC and the show at Talkin' SEC Pod. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next time when we're talking SEC.